2.2 Adding rational number notes. We're still not using calculators in this chapter. By the end of these notes, you'll be able to add rational numbers and solve real-life problems. Now, when we're adding rational numbers, we want to change the decimals and the fractions into like terms, then add. Use the same rules for signs as we did for the integers in Chapter 1. So, for example, let's say we have 1/10 plus 3/10. We want to make sure that we change the decimal into a fraction. So 0.3, which is 3/10, is the same thing as 3/10. So I'm just going to drop a 10 underneath it. Now we just add across. 1 plus 3 is 4. Carry over your 10. Now we simplify. 4/10. If you divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2, our answer is 2/5. All right. So let's go ahead and try another problem. Example 1, adding rational numbers. So this time we have a negative 8/3 plus a positive 5/6. So the first thing I want to do is check to see if they have common denominators, and they do not. I see a 3 and I see a 6. I'm going to ask myself, what can I do to that 3 to make it a 6? And I'm going to times it by 2. So I'm just going to times my numerator and my denominator by 2. So now I have a negative 16/6 plus a positive 5/6. Now when one fraction is positive and one is negative, we know we need to subtract. So just looking at the numerators and not looking at the sign or the denominator, just the numerator. So I see a 16 and I see a 5. And I'm going to ask myself which one is greater. 16 is. So I'm going to put this fraction on the left first. So I'm going to do 16/6 minus 5/6. And I'm ending up with 11/6. Since 16/6 is originally negative from right over here, I'm going to carry over that negative sign. So I know my answer is a negative 11/6. We need to change that to a decimal. So I'm going to do 11 divided by 6. 6 goes in 11 one time. When I subtract, I get a 5. So my final answer is going to be a negative 1 and 5/6. I'm going to try adding rational numbers with decimals. So I have negative 4 and 5/100 plus 7 and 62/100. So once again, when I have one decimal that's positive and one that is negative, we're going to be subtracting. I always put the number that is greater first. So I'm going to do 7 and 62/100 minus 4 and 5/100. When I subtract decimals, I need to make sure I line up my decimals when I subtract. So I'm going to do 7 and 62/100 minus 4 and 5/100. I need to borrow. So my final answer is going to be positive 3 and 57/100. And I'm going to know if it's positive or negative when I go back to my original problem. The 7 and 62/100 is positive, so my answer is a positive 3 and 57/100. So go ahead and try these next few on your own. All right, let's go ahead and try example 3. Evaluating expressions. So evaluate 2x plus y when x equals 1/4 and y is a negative 3/2. So we're just plugging in these fractions into our variables. So I'm going to do 2 parentheses 1/4 plus parentheses, negative 3 halves. All right, we've learned in class that whenever a number is directly in front of parentheses and nothing's in between it, that means it's being multiplied. So right now I need to take care of 2 times 1/4. So to the side, I'm going to do 2 times 1/4. Dot. I'm going to drop a 1 under that 2 and just multiply across. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 times 4 is 4. So I end up with 1/2. All right. So now my problem is 1/2 plus a negative 3 halves. The nice thing is my denominators are the same, but I have one problem that's positive and one that is negative, so I need to subtract. So just looking at the numerators and not the signs or the denominators, what's bigger, 3 or 1? We know it's 3. So we're going to do 3 halves minus 1/2. I end up with 2 over 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And since the problem, the 3 halves that we started out with, when you look over here, it is negative. Our answer is going to be a negative 1. Example 4, real life application. The table shows the annual profits in billions of dollars of a financial company from 2008 to 2012. Positive numbers represent gains and negative numbers represent losses. Which statement describes the profit over the 5-year period? On this, there's no statements given, so the question I really want to ask is, what was the profit of the 5-year period? So when I look at that table, I'm going to add up the decimals that look like each other. So I see 2 negative decimals, so I'm going to add those together. So 1 7/10 plus 4 75/100. So when I add, I'm going to get a negative 6 45/100, and it's negative because both of these numbers were negative. I'm going to do the same thing for my positive decimals. So I have 1 7/10, 85/100, and 3 6/10. So when I add all those up, I like to put the zeros as placeholders. So when I add that up, I get a 5. 14 plus 7 is 21. I get a 6. I get a positive 6 15/100. So I want to figure out what my profit is. So we know we lost 6 45/100. We know we had a profit of 6 15/100. When one is positive, one is negative, we know we have to subtract, put the bigger decimal first when we're just looking at the decimals and not the signs. So I'm going to put 6 45/100 on top when I subtract, minus 6 15/100. Since 6 45/100 is negative, I know my answer is going to be a negative 30/100 or negative 3/10. So there is a profit of negative 3/10 billions or $300 million. Go ahead and try 7 and 8 on your own.